I often hear people saying, it's turning around, it's getting better, and they point to this one little current of like amazing stuff that's happening. And I wonder, is it really getting better, or is just the alternate current, right? Because it seems like whenever the kind of mainstream system moves in a very specific direction, it will tend to create these countercurrents, and sometimes those countercurrents will have a level of virtue that's really unique. Um, so the example that I give is that is parkour, right? Uh, Parkour is something that literally every child did, right? It's just a name for exploratory locomotor play, right? Which is universal to children, universal to mammals. We see it in, it's huge in other primates. So we've formalized it, we've created philosophy around it, but that's at the heart of it. It's also the heart, it's also the fundamental kind of urge behind skateboarding, snowboarding, skiing, right? It's all this locomotor exploration. So, but there's this weird thing, which is that we have the greatest parkour human beings probably that have ever lived, or at least have lived in historical times, right now.
Yes.
And yet we have the least competent on average population in these realms that has ever existed. Yes. So it's been lost, right? It used to be every kid got to experience running, jumping, and climbing as a regular part of their childhood.
Right.
More and more, there are literally children who never experienced these things, who've never been allowed or given space for real locomotor play, at least since the time they were tiny children. And so we can see this pattern over and over again, right? We spin this off, and it's like, okay, well, there's these specialists who are taking this thing way deeper than it's ever been. But if those insights don't percolate, and if it doesn't create change that's available to the mainstream, ultimately it's not helping that many people.
And doesn't it also work in the other way, in that we tend to sort of, like you said before, we sort of atomize these people into that particular virtuosity, and you've said this to me, and I won't disclose any names, but many of these people are kind of jerks, or not what they're not paragons of virtue, even though they have this particular virtuosity. And the same thing with MMA, and I've been talking to Rodney King about that, right? About that same thing, right? That we have these people, we're swinging away, justifiably so, from all the woo, but we threw out with the woo the philosophy that was about the cultivation of virtue in consonance with virtuosity, and now we've separated them, and we get these people who are not exemplars of what it is to be a good human being living a good life, even though they're excellent fighters, right? And so it also swings that way, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, we have I enjoy that conversation with Rodney, and I have deep background. I've done a lot of MMA training, so, and I follow MMA, so I haven't, I'm really aware of that. So when you said that, I think you said this actually in our conversation too, because we talked about this at some point. Maybe we did a conversation, maybe even with one of the martial artists. I can't remember exactly how it went down, but you have to, if you are going to cultivate the capacity to be have virtuosity of violence, you have to be scaling that up with wisdom, or it's irresponsible, right?
Yes.
We don't.
Go ahead.
And we actually have a problem, which is that, and this goes back to the systems versus individuals, right? So I can start an MMA school, right? And I can make that MMA school deeply philosophical, and I can try to educate all the people who come through. But if I have a young, talented athlete who now is capable of fighting at a high level, I can either help him fight at a high level, or someone else will, very likely. And once he's fighting at a high level, if he creates a persona of being extremely aggressive and negative towards his opponents and shit talking and trash talking, he'll make more money.
This is the problem of Alcibiades with Socrates. It's exactly what the problem is. right? And Plato wrestled with this extremely beautiful, talented person who's attracted to Socrates, but he's more attracted to power, and he of course becomes one of the most corrupt people in Athenian history. I and so what do you think should be done about that? I like it again. We've got to somehow
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. So
I feel we careen between two poles, and this is this again a pattern in our culture right now, where we're doing everything we can to eradicate violence. We talked about this earlier from people's lives completely, and then we on the other hand we glorify a virtuosity of violence that has been completely severed from virtue, and then we wonder why we are facing a lot of the problematics we have and a lot of the problems we have around violence in our culture.
Yeah, it's again, it seems to reflect that problem of the externalization of these virtues. So they're always, the virtuosity is always seen separately, right? And it becomes embodied in a very handful of a small handful of specialists, right? So again, the best MMA fighters today are probably the best hand-to-hand combat specialists in the history of human beings, for at least for their specific, task, right? But the general competence in rough and tumble play has never been lower, right?
It's
and wrestling a bit, right? It's impoverished, and it's impoverished in a way that's actually eroding of our capacity to interact and interrelate with other human beings as well.
That's
so
right.
we don't need more Conor McGregors, not just on the personal level of his virtue, but even his skill level. We need more people who can just grapple with each other.
Yes.
And so again, we're in this how do we cultivate the type of virtuous person, and then how do we create systems that are less eroding, right? I was watching One Championships, and I was noticing how respectful all the fighters are to each other, and that this feels different than the UFC now. And it used to be more typical of the UFC. And it's like, it is possible, right? It is possible to build cultures that are more like that. But there's these weird reciprocal things where we kind of have, as individual practitioners, as coaches, we have to sort of try to make our students those type of people and recognize that we're going to fail sometimes. And then hopefully those type of people are the type of people who will support a fighter who shows grace in victory and defeat, and who has care for their opponent, and be less supportive of the fighters who are great at trash talking and are disrespectful of their opponents, and more importantly, the people in their lives, which is all too often. So